We dedicated this fall series, both the first speaker and this one, to active and creative nonviolent responses to the tragedy of September 11, 2001. And in contrast to the 10 years of war in Afghanistan and the 8-year war in Iraq, which destroyed the country, we have here today 2 members of September 11th Families for Peaceful Tomorrows. It's also known in brief as Peaceful Tomorrows, who chose another path. Terry Green, an environmental health specialist, a dear friend. We worked together in Boston on environmental justice. And Loretta Filipoff, a recent friend and a retired nurse. They've come from Boston and Concord respectively, which they have done many times to give talks across the region and the country, as all of the September 11th families do. And they have committed themselves and their lives to what Terry Green said, I read a Boston Globe interview, was building bridges rather than bombs. Before they begin, let me read a brief commentary on Peaceful Tomorrows by the author of a new book who surveyed, if not all, many of the 9/11 families and groups which were formed by those who lost loved ones. He writes, "I found that at best, most such groups are politically centrist and cautious. Others have been avowedly pro-war and assertively in support of domestic policies that compromise our freedoms in the name of terrorism. Only September 11th Families for Peaceful Tomorrows has consistently and courageously maintained its commitment to nonviolence, tolerance, and peace." So we are so honored to have you speak here, and thank you for the generosity of time. She took a day off from work, driving this far and then driving back afterwards to speak in our forum. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Pat.
They suggested a format, somewhat informal, that I sit here and start them off talking. They will talk, they will, sort of, one talks, the other talks. There's no formal talks going on here, but we will learn, and you could start from here, about your loss and what it was that took you forward to build bridges rather than to support the building of bombs. We want to learn about September 11th, the organization, and all of the work it has done in the past 10 years. They've also brought, it's a slide with sound presentation, which when they feel it's like the right time, we'll have that put on. And I want to say that they also were interviewed by Daria Fisk on her WMUA program this week. I heard it was great. We will post it on the Trap Rock website as well. All right, so with that, why don't you take over?
Well, Pat knows I love her. Indebted to her for many years. Thank you guys for inviting us. I know back before 9/11, when I was young and in college, Trap Rock was an important institution because, I was one of those in our generation, where you hid under the desk when they said it. Let's pretend, there might be a nuclear bomb, and so let's just get down under the desk. And I lived within a mile of the school, so they said, okay, you guys are going to walk home. And I think this was at age 5 or 6. We're like, are these adults crazy? They really think this is going to work? So I did always have an interest about issues of peace and nuclear war growing up. And so I did, when this event happened, come with those concerns already as part of my life. And I just thank you for being here.
Thank you also for inviting us. And I just want to say a word about Andrea LeBlanc. She was the person who instigated this, and she was supposed to be with us, but she had to travel to Spain, which was a good thing for our international network. And she came home after the storm, and an oak tree had gone through her roof, so she can see daylight. from her roof, and she's not with us today. We'll miss her. When I didn't think to go back that far, and the reason I have notes is because when I was on Daria's show, there was one point where she asked a question and I was responding, long answer, and I started to lose my train of thought. And some of you out there may know what I'm talking about, so I thought, all right, have something written down. All of us were affected by the events and the tragedy of 9/11, everybody. And for me and my family, those affected directly, the pain and the dismay and the utter confusion that we felt was enormous. We would have turned to my husband and asked him what this was about. We would have talked about it. We would have discussed it. But that was not going to happen. And I found that besides being confused, I was angry. And I didn't know what I was angry with. The people who did this were dead. I kept saying that. I knew then, and I know now, that we all have choices. And the choices we made are what we're doing. And I think the choice that I made at that time was to think about everybody in the world, not just me, and how we treat those people. Because I kept asking, what did we do to cause this? That was not popular. So during that time when I was a little bit unpopular with some people, I thought about my husband, and I reminded those people who knew us. My husband loved all people. He actually learned to say, "Do you like Chinese food?" in at least 17 different languages. Just to communicate with people. It was a way of getting it started. So we'd be sitting in a restaurant waiting for food, and he'd turn to them and say in their language, if they were a different language, teach me how to say, "Do you like Chinese food?" So now he'd wipe that down. That was another language that he knew. And I knew that he would not want me to be angry. So I'll talk about that day because I think you probably want to know that. But do you want to say something first?
Well, I was just going to say a little about Donnie, but sure. My brother Don, that's him, that gorgeous person in the middle, with his son Charlie, who is now a college student himself. And that was me to the left, a couple of years before 9/11. One of the reasons I put the picture up is in the talk. Some of our members have been asked when we're speaking, and we say our response was not to seek revenge. People said, well, you must not love your brother very much or your sister very much then. And such a bizarre question. So I sometimes start my talks with a picture, just it's worth 1,000 words. Of course, we loved each other deeply. And I also, take this chance to share a little bit of who he was. There's a lot of ironies. Don, he loved his family so much, you can see, and he always took his time with us. That was why he was a hero to us. He died on United Flight 93, which, is the plane the passengers took over and crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. And so, there's a lot of talk of heroism, and of course at all the sites there was heroism. But, it was really his day-to-day, how he was as a person, is what was so immense to us. And also, in his work, he chose a work that was so much more kind of opposite to the events of that day, because he worked with my father in aeronautical engineering as making airplanes flight safety instruments, a company called Safe Flight. So he was just a passenger that day, but he was a pilot. He'd been flying, I think, before he was in his teens. And, there were so many positive responses at the time of 9/11 with everyone trying to do what they can. He sat on the board of a group, the Corporate Angel Network, where they fly cancer patients to treatments voluntarily on corporate jets, so they don't have to get exposed to all of the other people's infections. And after he died, my sister, who was also working with that organization, he was a volunteer on the board, but managed to get flights of blood from Florida up to Ground Zero to help out, and everyone, rushed in to help. It was amazing to see New York in that period. But just to say, early on, one of the things so troubling to see was how we started to turn that energy from uniting and standing united for one another, and it started to break apart. And even President Bush at the time was saying things, some quotes about we're not at war with Islam. I have
16 good quotes he made.
Yeah.
I
This is
remember that.
one, we're not at war with Islam, which most Americans respect as a religion of peace. He said that right away, September 16th. And there are thousands of Muslims who proudly call themselves American, and they know what I know, that the Muslim faith is based upon peace and love and compassion. But, there was obviously pretty quickly a call to war. There was a lot in the media. There was a lot of politicians starting to use 9/11 in a different way. And that was so painful to watch. So as people started to turn from uniting for one another to against one another, that was, just something. I wrote a letter to the editor right away in the Boston Globe about that I felt that, to me it felt like that was adopting more of the principles of the terrorists to respond in hate to people you don't even know, you don't know what they've done, rather than with compassion, and doing all of your energies to help one another, which is the way, I felt Don lived his life and was the better way to commemorate him. So,
On that day, 9/11/01, I guess I have to admit that we were living a pretty good life in Concord, Massachusetts, 3 grown sons, everybody doing their thing. And Al was 70, but he was still needed and wanted by people, and he was consulting for a company in California who needed him for a brief period of time. I think they heard we were going away on a longer trip, and they said, "Oh, quick, before you go, will you come here?" And all that trip and arranging his flight and rearranging it, one day I said, "Oh my gosh, he never did it this way." But I decided I couldn't go down that road because he did change his flight, but it didn't matter. He always traveled on Flight 11, and Flight 11 is how he went that morning. And he said, "Do you want to come with me?" Because we often traveled together. But we both had a lot to do because after he came back, we were going on a trip to Hawaii, long planned. So I stayed home, and he was coming home Friday, September 14th, on the red eye, which would have been our 44th wedding anniversary. That morning, I was writing notes. I was up early. I said goodbye to him. It was a beautiful, beautiful day. I hate those beautiful September mornings with the blue sky. I always hope for cloudy days and rain on September 11th. I'm sorry, but I just don't like that reminder. But on that day, everything was good, and off he went. And I was watching Good Morning America, sort of over there, while I was writing my notes. And I heard Diane Sawyer say in her soft voice, "A plane has just crashed into the World Trade Center." And I looked up, and they talked about it possibly being a small plane. And then I watched, horrified, when the second plane went into the other tower, and it was not a small plane, but it never occurred to me that it was my husband's plane, the first plane. I called my son who worked in a tower in Boston, and I said, a plane just went into a tower in New York. Did you ever think about what you'd do if a plane went into the tower? And so we had this little conversation. He left. He called me back shortly, and he said, Mom, when did Dad leave? I said, hours ago. And I could hear people in the background talking, and he said, well, they're saying it was a flight from Boston. It was Flight 11. I'm coming home. And he hung up the phone, and he took the train. And at the time, I know, it still hurts to tell that story. And his wife now, but his girlfriend then picked him up, and she's Dutch. She's from Holland. And her parents and her were on the phone, and everyone was crying. And they got to my house, and by then I had reached my church and called my minister, and people started flowing into my house. And I thought, I've got to reach my other sons. My oldest son lives in Texas. He's a geologist, and he was at a convention, but I could always reach his cell phone. And I left him a message in the nicest upbeat tone. Hi, when you get this, give me a call, just wondering how you're doing. And he had found out what had happened, not knowing his dad was on one of the planes, and said, I hope there's no message from my mom. And of course there was. My other son was the bureau chief in Moscow for the Boston Globe, and I couldn't reach him by phone. I think it was nighttime, well into the night, and so I emailed him and said, please call me. I believe your dad was on Flight 11. I mean, I know he was on Flight 11. So it took them over a week to get home. My other son and his girlfriend stayed with me for a long time. A lot of people came and went, and some people said, don't worry, we'll go get him. And I know I was in shock, and I know I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to what was on the TV. And I said, but who are you going to go get? And somebody in the room said, but it's what we do, in tongue-in-cheek, we go get him. And I thought about that, and I knew so quickly that I was so out of step with what I kept hearing. I mean, so out of step, as were my sons. My minister had suggested we have a gathering because there were just too many people coming to the house, and they need to see how you are. So let's have a gathering before we plan whatever we're going to plan. And so we went, and it was mobs of people, and somebody stuck pins all over us, flag pins and everything else. Now, nobody loved the flag more than my husband. He was Canadian when we moved here, and he got his American citizenship, and he had made his own flagpole, and the flag was always running. But I just felt there was something, the flag had a lot of baggage to me. It wasn't the same flag. I wanted to put out my peace flags all over my front wall. But I knew somehow that was not acceptable. When I put out my No War in Iraq sign, my neighbor did not speak to me for almost 2 years. And he said, you wouldn't have had that sign out if your husband were alive. And I said, I wouldn't have had to put it out if my husband were alive. And that was the last words we said for 2 years, and I never understood why. And then one of my sons quietly made a peaceful path with him, and we began talking, and now he's my new best friend. But it was awkward. I turned to my church community, and the friends that I had, the couples friends we had, became very toxic. They didn't understand me, and I knew I couldn't be with them. When they went to their little dinner on Friday night and all chit-chatted, didn't they think I'd like to go with them? Didn't they think to include me? And all those things stopped. So I got into my own pattern, and I didn't ever want to be with them on a Friday night again anyway. And everything changed. Everything changed. And the first thing I did, I'm talking too much now.
We're hanging on everything you're saying.
Well, I knew that I wanted to do something about what happened, and what could I do? So with the help of my family and my pastor, we came up with the idea of having a living memorial, and I established the Al Filipov Peace and Justice Forum. I left a few bulletins, because it was all I had, about the forum and our past speakers. And every year we bring a speaker. I was talking to someone about that, Abby, I guess, to speak about those issues which he cared about deeply, because he did care. He was a peaceful man. He was on the Human Rights Council in our town. Anytime he was on all the committees at our church, and every time he talked, it was on those issues. Our minister was a conscientious objector, so I had a lot of good friends. And I thought that, as Terry mentioned, I watched the drum beats. We had all this wonderful community gather around us, even the people in Iran thinking we were good. And then all of a sudden, and yes, Bush gave one or two good things, but then he gave that crusade speech. And I thought, does he know that a crusade lasts for years and years and years? And it did. And just last night, Gwen Ifill interviewed Condoleezza Rice about her new book on PBS. And even what she knows now, she said she would do the same thing. Darn it, don't we learn from our mistakes? I never understood Iraq. I never understood why did we have to go and kill innocent women and children, babies, take all the men away, put them in the prison in Abu Ghraib, and then go and kill their country, destroy their country. Was he a bad man? Of course he was. And there are millions of those right here too. So I didn't understand that. I didn't get to joining Peaceful Tomorrows yet, but we will.
Yeah. I mean, I think too, there's so many things Loretta said, it just totally resonates with me. And I think going way back to when I was young, and my mom died when I was pretty young, about 6 or 7. I think one thing about losing loved ones is you realize that this is it is possible to lose loved ones, you know, our own mortality, but also, you know, how much those people are so precious to you and what just one loss does to you. And I think the reason I'm joined in public health, environmental health, the field where I met Pat, was because of that initial loss, realizing that if you could just save one person, the vast difference that makes in so many people's lives. So when 9/11 happened and we saw all of these people killed, you know, including people, in our case, ones we loved and knew the kind of impact that has, and how much worse it makes the world because you don't have that incredible person anymore in it, that this could never be a solution towards a better world. How did these people decide that that would be, you know, how were they motivated to do that? And yet to respond in kind seemed just all the worse, making it all the worse. Once again, just take even more people who are innocent and they'll have that kind of loss and impact to the world. That itself was the enemy, you know, that the purposeful taking of lives rather than putting you know, as Pat says, I've said, rather than building bridges, bombing them. But, so, you know, that day, I didn't know Don was flying, and when I saw that plane had gone down, the Flight 93, you know, part of me felt, oh, good, you know, maybe, you know, little good, like at least maybe fewer lives will be taken than if it had reached its target, in which case not only they, but their target would be killed. But, you know, then I found out Donnie was on the flight, and it was just like a black hole, you know, hard to believe how our family could ever be the same. I am happy to say 10 years later that while the loss is still unimaginable, but Charlie, Don's son, on the far side, you'll get to see him when the lights go down, he's just such a positive person, and what he has taken is that, you know, as I mentioned, my mom died young, Don, both his parents died young, he's my half-brother, and Charlie was on NBC saying, these commemorations, he starts to look at the fortune he had, celebrating a life rather than mourning a life. So we try to do that, but right after the events, you know, when all the news was saying what Loretta was confronted with many of her neighbors, former friends, about, don't worry, we'll get them. I was watching people being interviewed and microphones in their face, you know, don't you feel better, we're gonna go get those guys. And there was a family member who just looked horrified and said, no, why would I want that? Our family doesn't want anyone else anywhere in the world to have to go through what we've been through. And that was such a, that was powerful to me to hear somebody expressing against, you know, some of the grain what we had been experiencing. And I don't think it's totally uncommon for family. I think maybe it's, there are those who definitely want revenge, but I do think that for many family members, that's just sort of the story we tell ourselves about retribution. I mean, even a recent study of those families who've lost someone to murder find that most are actually against the death penalty. And so we have this kind of mythology that what family members want and deserve is revenge, and somehow that brings peace to them, or a sense of justice. I think what we want, you know, and I was looking at Don's son and his daughter, my own son, a similar age to Don's younger daughter. My son was 6 at the time. And what we wanted is a sustainable world for them, you know, and with our growing ability to destroy one another so rapidly, readily, you know, it's just seemed I could not afford revenge. You know, I had to put my energies into how to try and make it safer for them, how to find ways to live together. And of course, you know, just one small person, but together with Peaceful Tomorrows too, we've joined with, it grew from a very small group, and Loretta can probably speak more to that, but we now have 200 or so family members. We had a lot of new family members this year because we were much more in the media with the 10th anniversary. And I think, you know, if you want to give an introduction, we can show some of the slideshow about it.
One of the things that I do is membership at Peaceful Tomorrows, and when somebody says we're going to grow the membership, there are parts of me that say, now, wait a minute, we're all people who lost someone. That is the membership. Aren't we all there? So when a new member comes along after 9 or 10 years, as some did, I greet them, and what I've been saying is, so in the nicest way I could, but I'm really saying, so where have you been the last 10 years? What have you been doing? How did you find us? And it's either because they heard us speaking out a year ago against Islamophobia. You know, the whole Park 51, the ground zero mosque is a misnomer. It's not a mosque, and it's not at ground zero. It's a building that they used one room as a prayer room. So that got out of hand by people who were hateful and revengeful is all I could say. So Peaceful Tomorrow spoke out against that. And then this year, lo and behold, new members, one from Canada. My goodness, she saw an interview that I did in Manitoba. So I don't even remember doing this interview, and anything I did in Canada was, can you get it right this time, because they always want to embellish something or say the wrong things. And this member saw that, and I could tell they're going to be very productive. We're refocusing and coming up with how to partner and revision, but we've got at least 250 members. My finding Peaceful Tomorrows was after the first forum. Oh, and I have to go back and tell you something, because this is important. In the days after 9/11, and I will get back to the other thing, in the days after 9/11, my senators and congressmen called me. The senators were Kennedy and Kerry at the time. And my kids were answering the phone, and the only working phone, because phones always go bad at times like this, was in the bedroom. And one of them came out and he said, "It's Senator Kennedy," and they could hear me talking. What were you saying? And then they were all standing there listening. They all expressed their condolences, the congressman also, at different times in the same day. And Kennedy was breaking up. His voice was breaking. He talked about my loss. And I said, "Oh, Senator, you've had so many losses." And so the two of us are crying. He called my husband a hero. Al wasn't a hero. He just was doing what he normally did on that day. But he asked what he could do for me. And I don't know why I had the sense to say, "I want you to go back to Washington and work together so that this kind of thing never happens again. Figure out what it is we did to be a part of it, to make it happen, and let's fix it." And they all agreed that they would do that. It happens slowly, I guess. But I don't think the Congress would be quite as bad as they are if Kennedy were still alive. I know people hate him and people love him, but he did a lot of wonderful things for the 9/11 families and for Massachusetts. He gave back to Massachusetts. But I started to say, when I learned about Peaceful Tomorrows, right after the first forum, our first speaker talked about citizen involvement and how one person could make a difference. And he gave examples from a book, and I can't remember the name of the book right now, I'm sorry. But I left there thinking, yes, I have a responsibility. I have a responsibility to speak out against them using my husband's name for their war purposes. And someone in my church heard me say that and said, "Well, do you know about this group?" And they showed me a magazine, Mother Jones, with a picture of Rita Lasar, and she was an older woman who had gone to Afghanistan to talk to the people there right after we dropped our smart bombs and let them know that there were Americans who really cared about them, and they lost their loved ones just like these Peaceful Tomorrows members who went to visit Afghanistan showed we lost loved ones. Now, the majority of people in Afghanistan, my son has told me this, have no clue about the towers or 9/11 or anything that happened that day. I'm sure in the city they do, but in the outlying regions, they have no clue about what happened to us. So I don't understand this whole latest thing about the general who brought pieces of the World Trade Center to Afghanistan, and now there's going to be a statue, a 9/11 statue at Ground Zero, and I think you were asking about Ground Zero and what we thought of it, and I just heard all this on the discussion list. But anyway, so I met Rita in this picture, and I thought, oh, I don't know if I could go to Afghanistan, but I want to be like them. And I called and I found out, and I met with them, and it was like I was going home. It was, there they were, these people who were in step with me, who thought the way I did, who didn't want any war, who just, and not only that, they told their story, we hugged, we cried, and then we went out and we did other good things to help others. And I called them immediately, my new best friends that I never wanted to know. And you'll hear other people in Peaceful Tomorrows will say that, but I am the one who started that. And they are. We were all in step. Oh, we have different thoughts. Somebody might be for the death penalty and others are against it. Majority are not for it. But it just felt like people we could work with. And we worked immediately, and Terry will talk more about this. For the 5th anniversary, we brought together people from 17 countries around the world who had all suffered their pain and their violence and were working towards nonviolence in their ways. People from Russia, the Beslan attacks, Madrid, Rwanda, Japan,
Sudan, Israel and Palestine.
Chile.
There's Joe Barry and
England
and Ireland who
Pat McGee, Joe Barry and Pat McGee,
who formed it. Yeah.
Pat McGee killed her father, and they became friends, and they
met by accident and sharing a taxi.
Yeah, and became friends, and they go out and speak together. One of our members met with the mother of Zacharias Moussaoui, the so-called 20th hijacker, which he never was. And members of Peaceful Tomorrows went to that trial to testify, not for him, not against anyone, against the death penalty. It was taken all out of context, and people wanted to say we were terrorist lovers, but but what it was about was no death penalty. The people in Oklahoma City that we met with at an earlier date found that the death penalty did not make them feel any better, and they felt there was a lot to learn about Timothy McVeigh. I'll talk more about that later. I'm sorry, I went on and on too long.
No, that's all right. I'm just thinking we should probably show the slideshow, and then we'll open to questions, and we have a few other things.
Rule of law.
We have all sorts of things that we could be here.
Because our loved ones were killed, we threw out the Constitution and we started torturing and waterboarding and everything, and Terry can talk about that.
There's plenty, but some of it's in the slideshow, so I guess, can we do the lights, and am I supposed to hit the button, I think? Okay. I know one of these is supposed
September 11th Families for Peaceful Tomorrows was founded by family members of victims of the 2001 attacks on America who united to turn their grief into action for peace. By developing and advocating nonviolent actions in the pursuit of justice, we hope to break the cycles of violence engendered by war and terrorism. We actively acknowledge our common experience with all people affected by violence throughout the world and work to create a safer and more peaceful world for everyone. Peaceful Tomorrows was formally launched on February 14, 2002. The founders chose our name from this quote by Dr. Martin Luther King. The past is prophetic in that it asserts loudly that wars are poor chisels for carving out peaceful tomorrows. One day we must come to see that peace is not merely a distant goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at that goal. We must pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means. In January of 2002, 4 Peaceful Tomorrows members were part of the first U.S. civilian group to visit Afghanistan since our country invaded just 9 weeks earlier. The presence of Americans, particularly September 11th family members, proved to be the human element that encouraged journalists to depict the plight of the Afghan people. Ultimately, we were able to put a human face on the cost of war by later sending 2 more delegations to Afghanistan. Hibakusha refers to people who have experienced atomic explosions. Peaceful Tomorrow's relationship with Japanese Hibakusha is special. They were the first peace group to reach out to us and to travel to meet with us in New York City in April 2002. Family members have traveled to Japan on several occasions to meet with peace groups there and strengthen our bonds with those who were the first victims of the original Ground Zero. Because our goal is nothing less than world peace, Peaceful Tomorrows has campaigned against the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Our experiences have taught us that the way to reduce the threat of repeated acts of terrorism, like those that claimed our relatives' lives, is not to bomb, invade, and occupy other nations, but to identify the root causes of violence and abuse of human rights, and to support organizations expanding the capacity for settling grievances nonviolently. One of these is the Iraqi civil society organization La Amph, which means no violence in Arabic. This is a network of Iraqi activists building a non-violence movement to resist occupation, terrorism, and corruption in Iraq. Peaceful Tomorrow's members have traveled to Iraq and met with many victims of violence there. We were one of the first groups to lobby Congress for an end to the Afghanistan and Iraq wars. 2 conflicts that today an overwhelming number of Americans want to see ended. Our group has also teamed with the American Friends Service Committee, a 93-year-old religious organization founded on the principles of nonviolence. Together we have established exhibits all over the U.S. called Eyes Wide Open. These exhibits are enormous displays of empty boots of soldiers and empty shoes of civilians, calling to mind the enormous human loss from war. On September 11, 2006, family members of September 11th, the Oklahoma City bombing, and the Rwandan genocide were participants in our conference, Civilian Casualties, Civilian Solutions. This groundbreaking international conference featured 30 terror victims from more than 18 countries who have created organizations that promote peaceful conflict resolution. The result was the International Network for Peace, a dedicated group of organizations formed by survivors of political violence to promote justice, reconciliation, and initiatives that support nonviolent solutions to terrorism and war. Peaceful Tomorrows views closure of the Guantanamo Bay prison as crucial to reestablishing U.S. credibility on the rule of law. Peaceful Tomorrow's members have been in the news advocating for the building of Park 51, the controversial Muslim community center planned for Lower Manhattan. We believe that America's constitutional guarantee of religious freedom applies equally to all citizens, regardless of race, creed, or color. Peaceful Tomorrows was awarded the 2002 Pax Christi National Peacemaker Award, the 2003 Miranda Peace Award, and was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2003 and 2004. Our individual members also have been honored several times. Today our group consists of 200 family members living in 31 states and 7 foreign countries. We have thousands of supporters on our mailing list. Peaceful Tomorrows is committed to taking our message of turning our grief into action for peace to ever wider audiences. You can help us by visiting our websites and signing up to get involved in our many campaigns. In the words of Mahatma Gandhi, "Non-violence is the greatest force that humanity has been endowed with." And as founding member David Patorti puts it, we believe that peaceful tomorrows begin with what we do today.
Oh, it's beautiful.
So, thanks to our member Nancy Mayer for putting that together as part of her visit more recently to Japan, I believe a year ago. We did have several members, a member who just went to Afghanistan around this year on the 10th commemoration of 9/11 on a peace mission, and members who just returned from, is it the 5th Peace Nonviolence Conference by that group, LAUMF, the Iraq Nonviolence Network. And I do have to just point out, we'll open it up to questions, but I usually ask how many people have heard of that group, LAUMF, before.
Yeah.
LAUMF, No to Violence. It's the Iraqi Nonviolence Network. So you do have to wonder, when we spend so many resources on war and we have so many messages telling us to stay angry and afraid, why we don't hear about a group that's in most of the communities across Iraq trying to establish civil society where, while they aren't for U.S. occupation, they are following principles of Gandhi and Martin Luther King of nonviolence and want to stop, bloodshed. You don't hear about our group, the International Network for Peace, that most of the terrorist victims in incidents around the world and genocides in Rwanda, Sudan, that when we met, we all wanted to turn our grief into actions for peace rather than revenge. And so that's something we hope that you will share.
Did you connect kids, teenagers here with Afghanistan kids?
Yeah.
Through Skype? Do I remember reading about that?
We had, we were approached by a middle school in Groton, Massachusetts to come. They're trying to break a Guinness Book of World Records, the world's largest book, and they had MIT design it, and they decided it would be about peace. So they invited our members in Massachusetts to come visit, and we don't live so far, so my son and I went to visit, but I thought, this is a little, the Guinness record. But they were an amazing group of middle school students, and one of them had just lost his brother in Afghanistan, and they're very serious in their commitment. They have Nobel Peace laureates who have written them letters. They wrote out a framework. How would you, do you think we could achieve peace, and how? And if you go to their website, you can read some of the letters, including from our family members, but others. So just that's by way of preface. There's another group in Afghanistan, Afghan Youth Peace Volunteers, in one of those remote regions Loretta spoke of that don't even really know that much about 9/11. They have been trying to hold conversations with students across the U.S. and other parts of the world. They don't have many resources, but they somehow manage to have Skype. And so on the 21st of each month, they have these global days of listening, and they schedule conversations. They invite our 9/11 family members to talk with them and then have people listen in. They have classrooms that have conversations with them. So these students in Groton had their conversation with them, and I think that was in the Wall Street Journal. They wrote that up, that they had their conversation. So even though you don't hear of these things, they're out there, and you can easily, you can connect. It's not that hard. And so that's one of the places we find hope is in these people-to-people connections. They have been working with the groups that talk about Friends Without Borders, and it's just that if we understand one another, we don't have to have it all be about hatred and fear. Yes, we have our differences, but we all actually have so much more in common, and there's a lot of unity even in the face of loss, and to stop these cycles of violence that, as Loretta has said, she recognizes we also have to look at our role in, because it didn't start with 9/11. We have such a history of human violence to where we all could find justification for eradicating one another, but we have to end it somewhere.
I see a smile on Loretta's face, and does it have to do with the poem?
It does.
All right.
That she would like to read, and I think it would be a lovely way to
I will.
conclude.
I'll just read the end part.
Sure.
Pat kept telling me that she read my story, and it was so wonderful, and I thought, what? So this morning I went to look, and I said, oh, she must have liked this poem. Judith Hill is the author, and she wrote this poem on 9/11, or right after 9/11, and I'm skipping 2 of the verses, and I'm going to start with wage peace with your listening, hearing sirens, pray loud, remember your tools, flower seeds, clothespins, clean rivers. Make soup, play music, learn the word for thank you in 3 languages. My husband. Learn to knit and make a hat. Think of chaos as dancing raspberries. Imagine grief as the outreach of beauty, or the gesture of fish. Swim for the other side. Wage peace. Never has the world seemed so fresh and precious. Have a cup of tea and rejoice. Act as if armistice has already arrived. Don't wait another minute. And I want to cry. I have grandchildren. And we're doing this for them. We're doing our peace work for our children and our grandchildren.
Don't you want to continue listening?
No, there's no more to say. But I just think it's so important that we continue for the next generation and the next generation.
To wrap up, there's a quiet, about all of us. In listening to you, there wasn't a rush at questions. And it's very clear that you spoke to our hearts and souls. And I feel, as everyone does, immense admiration for the models of peace and waging peace that you both are.
And we,
Thank
of
you.
course, don't want your silence. We want your voices.
Exactly.
And thank you for reaching out to get involved, and thank you for being here and strengthening us and strengthening your communities and world.
I think we should